Hello, and welcome to another episode of Road to Doommageddon. And I'm looking at the Ukrainian war once again, and what's going on over there, and also looking at Europe, because I think there's a lot happening behind the scenes in Europe. And then we're going to look at the White House and see how this all plays out with the United States involved. And then I'll kind of give some of my analysis on everything. Okay, so in Ukraine, I think everyone's kind of getting on board now with this narrative that Ukraine is collapsing. Now, beware of this narrative and how fast it switched. You have to always ask yourself, like, what are they up to? You know, what were they up to before when they were telling you every day Ukraine was winning and that, you know, Russia was on the verge of collapsing and they couldn't sustain the war anymore, and, you know, all their huge losses, and, you know, Russia was going to be on an economic collapse, and etc. Right? I mean, these are all the things that we heard. Putin was assassinated. There was a double running around. I mean, these are all the stories. It was all lies. Okay, so they were basically feeding you lies every day for months. Where the reality was, Russia was inflicting severe casualties along the entire front line on a level that you haven't seen in modern warfare. They were losing, in my opinion, upwards to 1,000 to 2,000 troops every day. Probably 20 to 40,000 in a really bad month, like just, I believe this last month was probably horrendously bad. Now, these numbers I'm using are KIAs, wounded, surrendered, or fled. Okay, so it may be different calculations. But the numbers that they were throwing out there was 100 died every day, or 100 was, you know, were casualties, whatever that would imply. And I call that BS on that. It's too low. Then they were saying 200. Then they were saying 1,000. Now they're getting close. And the reason why they're changing this narrative is because the lines are literally collapsing. And the Ukrainians are bringing grannies to the front line. And I'm not kidding. They're now summoning women between 18 and 65. And you can Google some pictures of these troops ready to go to the front lines. And you're going to see about 30% are women of all ages, young boys and older men. This is what they're sending to the front line. Your grandmother, your grandfather, your younger brother, younger sister. It's appalling. This is how bad it is in Ukraine. That they're resorting to that. The recruitment officers are literally chasing down boys on the street. They're given summons and they're chased down, tackled. And they're going right to the front line. Now, the Ukraine lines don't have seasoned troops anymore. They're all gone. Not only that, there's mercenaries all throughout. Just running around. It's chaotic. They're shooting at each other. They're literally having firefights between different groups because they don't know who the enemy is. There's no command and control anymore. That was all destroyed by the Russians. You know, they have very little, you know, radio communications anymore. They don't have any heavy weaponry. They don't have any artillery support. Well, all of it's over opposite the city of Donetsk. They're firing 400 shells a day into Donetsk, but they don't do any fire support on the behalf of the cannon fodder that are in the trenches. So this is a horrendous strategy. Now keep in mind, the United States is controlling this entire operation. The Pentagon is running this war for Ukraine. So all the criticisms for this war, you need to take them right back over to the United States Pentagon. because that's where it's happening. Zelensky's a puppet. He was put there because Ukraine is a vassal state. Look at the Bidens are over there in, years doing all kinds of nefarious activities. This laptop is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of classified stuff that we'll probably never know. We already know that they created 30 to 40 biolabs there. They were also creating naval fortifications along the Black Sea. They're sent over trainers, special operations units, State Department officials, CIA intelligence, satellite technology assistance, and NATO commanders. Okay, you've got basically the West up to their eyeballs over there in Ukraine. This is a full-on war, mostly between the United States and Russia. So think about this as far as our escalations, right? In Russia's eyes, okay, a Tomahawk cruise missile, it comes into Russia and hits a training facility. That's just something I'm speculating on. There's no Tomahawk cruise missiles there yet. But if that happened, did the Russians care if that was launched by the Ukrainians or the United States? No. They see that as that's a United States weapon. Just like all these other weapons that are over there. That's how they see them. They see them as this is a Harpoon missile that hit, such and such. Or that was a Neptune missile that hit the Moscow. Remember that flagship in the Black Sea that got hit? It was more than likely from a Neptune. It's an anti-ship missile. And now you've got, medium-range missile systems in Ukraine. You've got long-range 155 millimeter howitzers over there. That's what hit the oil platform in the Black Sea. That happened just a couple days ago. So you can see how these longer-range weapons are very, very escalatory. And this is the stuff that the United States is bringing in. And again, it doesn't matter if it's a Ukrainian firing an American 155 millimeter howitzer, or in their eyes, it could be an American. They're seeing this as a direct threat from the United States. So you have to keep that in mind. Okay, so we have always in the background, you have to keep in mind the escalation of the false flag. The false flag is very sinister. It could just happen out of nowhere. I mean, you could just open your browser up tomorrow morning and see that a huge cloud of toxic chemicals just killed 3,000 Ukrainians in Kiev, right? Now, this is something that is very, very possible. Not that specific event, but I'm just giving you an example. Keep in mind, the United States is like the queen of false flags. No one does more false flags than the United States. Almost every war the United States got involved with was started with a false flag to get intervention. So look out for that, because there's a lot of people calling for direct intervention in Ukraine. Now keep in mind that a Polish deputy prime minister, who just resigned actually, was advocating for just that and deploying nuclear weapons. You had the head of Germany's army tell their Air Force commander, this guy was Gerhartz, General Gerhartz, that they need to be willing to use nuclear weapons against Russia in Ukraine. Same thing was just announced by the UK top military commander. So there's a lot of very powerful people in NATO that are advocating for direct intervention. Now you got Adam Kinzinger, you got Mitt Romney, and the rest of the neocons on board with that too. All they need is a false flag. They are foaming at the mouth for a false flag, as well as the people in, well, I won't say the people, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania are really behind getting this into a full-on war. Now keep in mind those Baltic states are truly the lapdogs of the United States. They always will just jump whenever they get told to. And they're just yappy little things at their feet. So you've got this fragmentation going on in Europe that's getting quite severe. You got the UK, which is also rabid and foaming at the teeth, ready to get involved. And as one Russian foreign minister said, that is just idiotic of, I'm paraphrasing, idiotic of England to wanting to get involved with a nuclear war, because it would just be annihilated. The island would simply be annihilated, which he's probably correct. But you see how the rhetoric is getting really out of control. And it's mostly the West who's instigating all this rhetoric. I mean, you've got this Deputy Secretary General of NATO who came out just about a week ago and announced that he thought that a country had a sovereign right to decide whether they want nuclear weapons deployed on their territory. I mean, can you see the implications of that? Now, I think at this time he was referring to countries that were in NATO, but the premise of this argument supersedes being in a NATO or an alliance. It's like if you're saying a country has a right to decide, you see how they're trying to make an excuse to escalate this thing? And when you look, if you're just not paying attention, you're not seeing any of these things. But the thing is, when you see these things, you start to see the dangers, and you start seeing the intentions of the people behind all this stuff. And you start realizing that these people want a war. I mean, just start going and looking at all this rhetoric. And if you haven't been paying attention, it's time to start paying attention now. Because this is like scary stuff when you start hearing people talking about full-on intervention in Ukraine. Now, a lot of people are thinking that this is the end. This war is all over. Russia won. They're collapsing. And I say no. It's not over. And they're building this new narrative for a reason. This victim narrative that Ukraine needs help. What does that mean? When you think about it, what does that mean? It means intervention. Okay? Whether it's going to be a gross escalation, like I would consider Finland getting into NATO is just a completely over-the-top escalation. Taking a fleet into the Black Sea and confronting Russia is complete, World War III. What happens if they do a full-on blockade of Kaliningrad? Lithuania already kind of started that. And that was on the behest of the United States. It was done because the United States told them to do that. You have to assume that at this point. Lithuanians just not going to do that on their own. It's like this little country who barely has an army. So, if the United States is telling Lithuania to do that, then the United States wants to escalate this more. You have to start kind of trying to look through the curtains on all this stuff. You can't just take everything on face value. I mean, look what if you took everything on face value, Ukraine was winning every day, for months. Well, if you took that on face value, obviously you realize now you're being lied to. You have to always try to look behind the curtains. And behind the curtains shows everything points to they want a full-on escalation. And I think that we could even be looking at some type of NATO intervention. Now, what's NATO's strength? It's not artillery, for sure. It's not troop strength. They don't really have much tank strength either. The only thing they have any kind of strength is in aviation. And maybe a possibility of some kind of nuclear threat. So if they were going to do anything, it would be along the lines of air defense systems, long-range missiles, or aviation. Okay, those are really the only options. I don't think they're going to get into the Black Sea. So I don't think you're going to see much naval unless it goes around like a Kaliningrad blockade, because it's like a port. So the other thing to think about is if they are trying to escalate this thing around Kaliningrad, this could be the first step. A lot of people are calling this like the major escalation and all. I think at this point, not yet. Because keep in mind that they're blocking like 50%. And they're only, this is in violation, by the way, of all their agreements. Just so you know, they had an agreement, I believe the last one was in 2019. And there's a corridor that goes between Russia and Kaliningrad and between, I believe, Belarus, Poland, and Lithuania. Sort of like through that area. And if I understand correctly, this corridor has a right-of-way for things of necessary to Kaliningrad from Russia. So I'm not clear if this is actually a blockade of that, or is this a blockade of things coming from Lithuania, products being sold into Kaliningrad. So there's not a whole lot of detail on that. But anyway, this could be something that leads to a bigger event. This could be the starting point. Maybe people are seeing this as a starting point and assuming that this is going to be like a full-on blockade. But at this point it's not, and it's not a sea blockade. Russia has access to Kaliningrad with ferries and ships. So at this moment, I'm not going to get too excited about this particular event unless it develops into something, more ominous. So let's look at Europe, because Europe is in dire straits. You got this complete fragmentation going on. Let's kind of look at some of these places. You got like the Balkans, which is very divided. You got like Serbia, which is more or less pro-Russian, not involved with, wanting to do any sanctions. Hungary doesn't want anything to do with oil embargoing. They are very reliant on, especially gas from Russia. Poland, Czech, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, the Baltic states are all like foaming at the mouth, trying to get the war going, as well as the UK, and they're preaching austerity to their people, doing this for fighting for freedom. You've got France getting a lot of cold feet. Macron barely won to Le Pen and lost his majority in the parliament, all because of this, the war. You've got massive uprising protests going on all over Europe. You've got huge marches going on in Germany, pro-Russian. You've got pro-Russian marches in Italy. You got the 5-Star movement going on in Italy again. This is the independent Italy exit movement. You had a big Italian general come out against the war, basically saying that Italy, that they should not get involved with weapon deliveries, and that Ukraine is collapsing. This happened a few weeks ago. You had a prominent German admiral have to resign because he made some statements regarding that he felt that this war was unnecessary. You have Germany holding back on their weapons shipments to Ukraine. You have Czech Republic wanted to send their T-72 tanks into Ukraine and exchange. Germany was supposed to give them Leopard 2 tanks, and now Germany is kind of reneging on that. So Germany has been making all kinds of excuses to not give weapons and assistance to Ukraine. It's become a real tenuous relationship. And in response, Oleg Arestovich, the presidential advisor to Zelensky, has been throwing F-bombs around and blaming, Germany for its the cause of Ukraine's failures because Germany didn't give them rocket launchers. I mean, it's the unbelievable rhetoric coming out of Ukraine. And this is like a thug regime. It's a puppet state. I mean, it's a vassal state of America. And it's also, complete corruption. As I mentioned with the Bidens over there. This is worse than like Zimbabwe, and they want to bring them into the EU. So, you can see how the reactions are going to be in Europe. Countries that have really owned up to their bargain as far as participation in the EU, and they're seeing like this most corrupt country on the earth coming into the EU consortium with massive debt in the middle of a war, being offered candidacy. You have Germany trying to twist Netherlands' arm not to allow Ukraine into the EU. You have Macron coming out, with the whole idea that everyone needs to work with Russia because Russia's going to be here forever. It's like part of Europe, and that everyone has to kind of get along at some point with Russia. And mentioning that Ukraine's probably going to have to cede some territory, and that's probably the reason why Macron and the Italian, it was Italian Prime Minister, and the German Chancellor went over there it was all in the guise of trying to talk about this EU candidacy thing, but really it's more because probably they want to end this war. They don't want to be open about it. They don't want the United States to know that that's what they were over there for. They're trying to get Ukraine to twist their little arm a little bit to get to the table and talk to Russia. And they're going to have to cede territory. So I think that's what that whole visit was. It was a couple days ago. And you could see on the German Chancellor his face that he was really tense. He didn't look very happy. I think he realized he went over there, wasted his time. And you got to keep in mind that Zelensky is a puppet of the United States. The United States does not want any negotiation. So this really puts a pickle for the rest of Europe, because Europe is getting destroyed, for lack of a better word. You have protests going on everywhere. You're going to have like economic collapses going on. There's going to be austerity, a lot of really unhappy people. And this could just completely blow up, like where you have the yellow vest all over the place again, just like they were before. You could have, revolutions literally going on, upheaval on a scale we haven't seen in decades over in Europe. Kind of, I think of Europe now as like 1939 Europe, very fragmented, a lot of little mini alliances going on, Very, very dangerous situation. And I think that this could be the end of the EU as well. We could be looking at the end of the EU. I mean, I don't think very many people are putting that together. How precarious the situation is. If the war spills over into Europe, what happens to Europe if this really blows up? I mean, not even militarily, just like the way it's going right now, with all these sanctions and austerity and discontent, and what happens to the future of NATO? Keep in mind that Brussels rally was stop NATO signs. Now, you're not going to see that in your mainstream media. But if you do a little research, you can see what the people are against this whole war. And they don't want any more of this NATO crap. This is the United States. This was all Biden. He was the one who brought all this sanction nonsense on. And now the whole European continent is paying a severe price for Biden's little game to be part of a war against Russia, dragging in Europe across the mud, and possibly taking down NATO and the EU. I mean, I think NATO personally will survive, but I think the one in most danger is going to be the EU, because you could have exit movements going on, like in Italy. What happens if Italy pulls out? What happens if Britain continues their Brexit? I mean, that's it. All it takes is like Italy going out. What happens if France gets out? It's over. The year is done. And what do they have the Ukraine and the EU. So I think the EU going down will be one of the biggest events in the last definitely 50 years. I mean, that can you imagine the stock markets all around the world if the EU collapses, the euro collapse, and the loss of wealth? Staggering, and very, very possible. You have to realize that with this war, anything can happen. You could open your browser up and find that there's tactical nukes being dropped. There could be, the end of the EU. With this kind of stuff, you can't predict the black swans. We have to admit that this is a setup for black swans. And kind of leave it at that, right? I mean, we can't come up with a long list of everything that possibly could happen. And a black swan, by definition, is an unpredictable event that no one saw coming, right? So all we can do is speculate that this is like a swamp for a black swan. Biden's swamp. Okay, so I think I kind of, went over that enough. That Europe's in bad shape, right? I mean, I don't think anyone's going to argue against that. And we know that Ukraine is collapsing, and it's primed for some type of intervention. And because the United States is not just going to walk away from this. I think a part, and I'm kind of going over to the United States now, a part, of the Biden wishes he never got involved with this, because he effed up this big time. Not only that, he effed up Europe. And not only that, Russia is looking like a rock star. I mean, Putin's approval is 83%. What Biden's approval is 33%. I mean, that shows you just how much this thing backfired. You can't make this up. No one would have ever thought, unless, you really were following this thing, like I think, a lot of people, well, a few people did, Experts were saying, the consequences of a economic, recession, global recession was very likely from the sanctions, famine, and an energy crisis. All those things came true. Were they using crystal balls, or did this thing was kind of obvious? I think it was rather obvious. So you have to ask yourself, the people who are running this thing, we don't really know who they are. Are they doing this on purpose? Or are they just that completely incompetent that they have already wrecked the United States? I mean, the United States has never been this bad and wrecked like this before, and the loss of wealth since just a year. It's staggering. The country's divided. There's crime, drugs, homelessness, border crisis, constitutional crisis now going on. If you've been following this whole thing with the, this abuse against the justices of the Supreme Court, and these things are also to be protected. And there's certain factions in the United States that are happy to see, BLM riots, happy to see people looting. They're happy to see this lawlessness, gangs of criminals running around. They want that. As hard as that is to believe, all their actions point to that being their objective. Labeling parents at school board meetings as domestic terrorist. Yes, this has all happened in the United States. School shootings, other mass shootings that have lots of questions. When you start digging into these things, you start raising your eyebrows, right? How could this have happened? Okay, this was all done by design. And now they've taken this over to Europe. And it starts to make sense now when you see the pattern. And I call the cabal that's running this the Joker. The Joker is running America. Biden is an empty suit. He was selected, just like Kamala Harris. Why do you think they selected Biden now when he's like 80 years old and he's completely demented? He ran for president so many times I lost count. And every time he's passed off is just like, he's an old, fool. I mean, no one wants Biden. So how did he become president? How did Kamala Harris become vice president? Okay, why? Because they need these people to do what they're doing. You can't have a competent person in charge. It gets in their way. This is why they're all out against Trump, to get him out of the way. Now they're trying to do this whole January 6th thing to try to discredit him from, do this impeachment thing to basically get him so he can never run again. They don't want somebody in there. Now, I'm not a big pro-Trumper. I'm just telling you what they're doing. They can't have someone in there who thinks for themselves. So who's running things? Well, we don't really know, okay? All we can do is kind of speculate by looking at the damages that they've done. What things are their priorities? Well, they like chaos. It's like a George Soros kind of thing, right? So, maybe we have people in there that are, allies of George Soros. Maybe we have people like, Bill Gates type, depopulation. Look at the pandemics. Look at, pushing for a world war. Okay. Maybe there's a neocon in this cabal. I mean, Is it a think tank that's running things? Is it another country, a foreign interest from the Middle East that's running things? Okay, we don't really know, and that's what's so scary, because we don't know who's really running the United States. Who's the skipper at the wheel? And that's very, very scary to me. And I see all these actions pointing to trying to bring on a war. And they're using and abusing the countries of Europe. And I think some of these countries of Europe are like waking up and like, whoa, what did we get into? Germany, right off. Germany for sure. And the problem with Germany is it's a occupied puppet state to some extent of the United States. Same with Japan. Notice how Japan always has to toe the line with the United States, because it's an occupied country from the end of World War II. It was defeated, just like Germany, and occupied by the United States. Okay, full occupation. And people in the West, they don't understand. They think everything is all, like all about democracy and everything's for the people and everything. It's hardly the case. Look at your country. Look at what's been done. Look at all what's happened around the world. Look at all the wars the United States started. The famine, the destruction. Now, I'm from the United States. I'm ex-military, and I hate to say these things. It hurts me, But, what NATO and the United States did to this world, it's shameful. And when you hear people like Boris Johnson talking about needing to get the grain out of Ukraine to help the famine in the world, if you know really what NATO's been up to and the United States has been up to, that's just like a rat's ass lie. I mean, can that guy say that with a straight face? I mean, look at the sanction war in Yemen. Look at the sanctions, what they did to North Korea, the people, Venezuela, Iran. The destruction, to people's lives by NATO is has anyone ever sat down and doodled that up and come out with numbers? It's going to be worse than World War II. But, everyone has in their head that they're good guys. They're the policemen of the world. They're doing good. But the reality is it's the opposite. Look what they did to Iraq. Look what they did to Afghanistan. I mean, this is just pure evil, right? And look what they're doing now to Ukraine. Now, I'm not doing this because I'm pro-Russian. I'm doing this because I don't like war. I don't like what's going on in Ukraine. I think this is a travesty. This is evilness. The people of Ukraine do not deserve this. They don't deserve to have the grandmothers in the front line or the local locksmith, cowering in a trench, begging Zelensky for his life. Yes, there are videos like that. Or your younger brother being thrown there in a trench, all because the United States agreed to not expand NATO, but reneged and lied on their promise. Okay, that's what this was all about. And supporting the neo-Nazi movement in Ukraine. I mean, this is all being condoned by the West. I mean, you have these massive marches, thousands of people with tiki torches walking, through the streets at night, Kiev. I mean, you can Google that and you're going to be like, oh my God, this is what was happening over there? Yes. The United States knew that. It was used as a terror tactic against the people. They wanted that because the United States was running a war against Russia. The eastern part of Ukraine is pro-Russian. It's ethnically tied people. Most of them speak Russian. They live in that part of Ukraine. This is why Ukraine is just like blowing up houses and shooting at their own people. They're not really, in their eyes, they don't see them as their own people. They're seeing those as like Russians. You know, they instead of like uniting the country, you know, like if they had a president, like not Zelensky, he was actually, right since he got in, he was devising plans on how he could conquer, you know, all these territories, including the Crimea. They even had a map that they were invading Russia. The southeastern portion of Russia. On the Ukraine map actually has that, like included into Ukraine. So not only is Ukraine against those people, but it wants more of them. You know, it wants to torture and dominate even more of them. This is a really evil regime. When you start really looking at it, it's diabolical. I would say this is something that, you know, maybe on the level like Pol Pot. And when you get done uncovering all the genocide that's been going on in this country, this is something that's going to like blow people's minds. I mean, you had these SBU, that's the secret police, you know, torture factories basically all over, you know, this eastern, well, all Ukraine. I mean, you got bioweapons labs, 40 of them. And Zelensky wanted to bring nuclear weapons in. I mean, you can see all these things are so escalatory. And not only that, they were shelling Donetsk and other areas at about 10 times more than they were before. They did that right before Putin invaded. In other words, they did that to make him respond. Because there was a lot of people dying from that shelling. There were 14,500. So this had always been a war. Since 2014, 9 years of fighting between the United States and Russia. Okay, so you think that the United States is going to walk away from this? I mean, they did a coup attempt to put in, you know, the pro-American leaders. The United States trained the Ukrainian army. It sent a lot of weapons in. $100 billion already gone into Ukraine. And you had the Bidens over there, all their nefarious activities. I mean, the United States is up to their eyeballs over there, and they're not going to walk away. So this whole thing about, you know, you're hearing some of these, I believe it was New York Times, or no, Politico, that came out with floating the idea of needing to, you know, go to negotiate with Russia, and they're going to have to cede territory. Now, I can tell you this is not going to happen. And this is why, you know, they're setting up this negotiation team with, I believe it's England and France and Germany and the United States. Notice who's not included. Ukraine. Ukraine is not included in their own negotiations. And it's because the United States does not want Ukraine at the table. Because Ukraine's going to be getting really desperate pretty soon. They are going to be in a position where they're going to need to basically, you know, concede. Like, not just concede territory. They're going to have to, like, unconditional surrender. And the United States is there to prevent that from happening. That's why they're sort of taking the spot of Ukraine. And it's also because Ukraine is a puppet state. I mean, what more proof do you need than that? So the United States is working on this whole, in my opinion, they're working on this whole strategy right now of how can they open this war up to involve NATO. And they want to take it to the next level and get the United States involved as well, directly. Now, you have to put your mind maybe into these EU leaders. When they start getting, whiff of this, which I think Germany is, and France, and maybe Italy, they're starting to get a whiff of this. Like, oh my God, what did we get ourselves into here? Okay? I think they are starting to wake up. But they're also going to be in a position where they can't really do much. Because if they get dragged into this full-on conflict, and NATO has to declare war on Russia, I mean, how can they get out of that? You see, they're already in too deep. They're in way too deep as it is. They took the bait. And this was the plan of the United States, this cabal, was to drag Europe into this whole thing. And they're not just going to walk away. So they're going to keep on working on, the thing that I see is one of the major provocations is to try to pull Finland and Sweden into NATO. Fast tracking. Now, they need to get around Turkey on this. Turkey blocked it. Now, in my belief, Turkey is working for Russia through almost all of this. And I think this is really pissing off the United States. For one, Turkey, they had this summit where they were trying to do the peace. And, this was not with the United States involved. They had Ukraine and Russia there. And I think that they were hoping that they would get some negotiations going. It didn't work. Ukraine was towing the line of the United States at that point. Now, you could get some military leaders and so forth that basically almost do like a takeover where they're going to sue for peace and do an unconditional surrender. See, this is where the United States is going to try to prevent any negotiation. And I think that summit really pissed off the United States because it was like, no, they cannot, no, that's not going to work. They're not going to negotiate. And then notice it stopped, like right in its tracks. No more negotiations since then. So, you have to look at actions. You have to look behind the curtains and try to figure out what's going on here. And in my opinion, that's what was happening. The United States decided that it didn't want any more negotiations, and that's where that summit ended. And then you had Turkey blocking Finland and Sweden. And then, again, NATO tried to push it through, and Turkey again blocked it. And it became a little bit more adamant in blocking it, because the first time they kind of gave some lame excuse about, I think it was Sweden was helping some terrorist, with funding, or so it was something that really on the scale was not that, large, I would consider of a reason to prevent, their fast tracking them into NATO. There's more to it. Turkey is working with Russia to prevent World War III. You also have Turkey controlling the straits. You're not going to see Turkey allow the NATO fleet into the Black Sea, in my opinion. It may be a lot of snags and things that they try to throw in its path. Even keep in mind, Turkey is part of NATO. So this is really interesting development of Turkey blocking Finland and Sweden like this. You have to ask yourself, why are they doing it? It's because they're helping Russia. Well, and they have their own interests. Turkey does not want to see Russia collapse. Turkey has a relationship with Russia. It gets a lot of business, commerce. It has, vacationing Russians coming there. They share the Black Sea. It's very important to them. They had a good relationship for, eons. There's not much friction between Turkey and Russia. So there's incentive for Turkey to preserve this relationship. Now also, you had Turkey doing an intervention in Syria. Now, Turkey was attacking the Kurds. Now, keep in mind, who are the Kurds working with? The United States. You see? So Turkey is sort of like opening up another front that the United States has to deal with. It's causing problems in the Middle East, put that way. So this is very interesting. And I think you're going to see more coming out of Turkey than even at this level that we're at right now. It's very interesting because you also got Turkey buying the S-400 system, it's an air defense system from Russia. You're seeing them actually getting really cozy with Russia, and they may flip in the future, especially if NATO gets to the point where it becomes almost irrelevant. Keep in mind, if you see an EU collapse, what's that going to do to NATO? It's going to be diminished, or maybe it even collapses. So I think Turkey is being very astute and being very intelligent. It's one of the only countries besides Serbia and maybe Hungary that I think is actually looking out for, you could say, maybe looking out for its people. So, basically kind of wrapping things up, looking at Europe, this is bad, right? And in looking at the United States and what the United States is trying to do, and I think I made a pretty convincing argument that you're seeing the United States trying everything in its power to basically wage a war against Russia, whatever the cost. It doesn't seem that there's much limit to what the United States is not willing to do. When you look at all the weapons and so forth, I mean, there's never been such a massive amount of military aid ever provided to a country. Even Afghanistan, of 20 years of fighting, didn't get the aid that Ukraine did in just a couple months. I mean, this is off the charts insanity. And a lot of that money is totally unaccounted for. In other words, it's gone. It's gone. It's dark. Well, you're not going to see that money. The majority of it. So, it all fits in, and then you had, of course, the Bidens all heavily involved with Ukraine before this war started. I mean, you have to connect some dots here. You have to start thinking, was this all like a big concocted scheme that was being set up for years? And then, he gets selected he gets put into the White House. Now, keep in mind, it's not literally him. It's a cabal that's controlling this empty suit. He's just a foolish face of it. And so they get this guy in, and then they run their next part of the operation, which is, the main goal is you got everything all set up in Ukraine. You did all your bioweapons labs. You set up. They had a goal, I believe, of trying to build a navy. They built some port facilities and coastal fortifications in Ukraine, and I believe they were looking at building a navy basically there in the Black Sea that would be able to confront the Russians. Imagine the havoc that they could cause if they had, somewhat of a formidable navy. So this whole war is not going to go away. But on the other hand, it's probably not going to end up being a long proxy war, like you think of like a Vietnam or an Afghanistan. See, it can't go that way because the American people are not going to stomach that. Okay, well, thanks for listening. I'll talk to you on another podcast tomorrow.